everybody, Chris Parody here. Today I'm going to be teaching you the Jitterbug Waltz by Fats Waller. This is an arrangement that I made by using a lead sheet in the Django Fakebook and then making a couple other little additional changes of my own as I play through it more and more. This song is in 3/4 time, which we'll talk a little bit about more in a moment. And we're also in drop D tuning is the other important thing to note. You want to tune string 6 down to a D to be in tune to play throughout this arrangement. Okay, so as we get into the first 4 measures, these first 4 measures are pretty challenging. The nice thing is they're a big portion of the theme in the song, and they're going to repeat many times over. So once you get them down, you've got a lot of what you need. But getting them down is pretty challenging. There's many different things in motion at the same time, and it can be pretty tricky at first. So what we'll do is we'll go through some steps that I think can make it much simpler to play and much easier to play those first 4 measures rather than just jumping into the tab and trying to play them right away. So the first thing I would point out is what the bass line is doing. In a lot of the songs we've done on this channel, we've been doing pieces that are alternating bass pieces where we're moving back and forth between 2 or 3 alternating bass notes. And we're going to be doing something similar here, but because we're in 3/4 rather than in 4/4, the timing is going to change a little bit. What we're going to do is we're going to start on, in these first 4 measures, string 6 on beat 1 of the measure. Then we're going to go to string 4 on beat 2 and beat 3. So what that's going to give us is 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So that's a great thing to start with. Just getting into that waltz feel, that 3/4 feel with your bass line. Now sometimes what strings we're playing in combination is going to change, but that in essence is what the bass is going to be doing throughout most of the song. And as that's happening in the bass line, the tricky part is we have to add the melody in, of course. And the melody here is going to be a descending set of thirds in the key of D. So what do I mean by that? Well, if we played a D scale, let's say we started on the 3rd fret of the B string and we played a D major scale, just moving up that B string, finding those notes of the major scale. So that was a D major scale, all on that one string. On the 2nd string, I played 3, 5, 7, 8, 10, 12, 14, 15 in terms of the frets. Now at the same time, if I on the E string played also a D scale, but rather than playing from D to D, I'm going to play from F sharp to F sharp. So this would be from note 3 of the D scale to note 3 of the D scale. So I'm going to play, oh, here's Melba stopping in to assistant teach for the rest of the lesson. So we were talking about playing a D scale from the 3rd note, which is an F sharp, D, E, F sharp, although I'm going to put it onto the 2nd fret of the 1st string. So I'm on that F sharp, and I'm just going to play the D scale from that note to that note, F sharp, G, A, B, C sharp, D, E, F sharp. So now I've gone up the scale to that F sharp, the next octave up. Okay, now I've done 2 different sets of strings, and I'm going to put them together. And it's always good to play it both directions. In fact, this direction here is the important one in the Jitterbug Waltz, because that's what we're going to be doing throughout the song, is playing these descending runs of the D major scale in thirds. But that's a great thing to practice. I have all my students work on playing thirds in every key, because not only will they pop up in songs all the time, but they're a great harmony to know and understand, because they're a huge part of the chords we play. If we do any harmony singing, they're important. And I use them all the time when I'm improvising on many different styles of songs. So learn your thirds, because there's so much great use you can get out of them as a musician. But as I said, in the Jitterbug Waltz and in these first 4 measures, we're going to be doing a lot of playing those thirds with the aforementioned bass line, where we were playing 6, 4, 4, 6, 4, 4. The other nice thing about it, I should mention the fingering, there's basically two shapes you have to play here. You're either going to do your middle and your index, so in this case on the 3rd and 2nd fret of the B and the high E string, strings 2 and 1, or you're going to use your ring in your index. In this case I'm on 5 and 3. And then I use that same fingering up a whole step onto the 7th and 5th fret. Now I go back to the other fingering, the middle and index on frets 8 and 7. Same fingering, up a whole step again to the 10th and the 9th fret. Now I switch fingerings again, ring and index, 12 and 10. Same fingering, a whole step ahead of there, 14 and 12. Then I go back to the original fingering, middle and index on 15 and 14. So if you think of the end being this fingering, the beginning being that same fingering an octave down, another helpful way you can memorize this is just keep those in mind, because in between the start and the end point you have a pair of that fingering where your fingers are spaced further apart, followed by a pair of this fingering where they're spaced closer together, and then another pair where they're apart. So those are some helpful ways that I try to help students memorize those thirds. And what's going to be so helpful about that is now you've got your fingerings down for these first 4 measures. So let's get into them. What's tricky again is just the way the bass line and these measures are going to match up. The first thing I'd recommend starting with would be this. That was measure 1 into the first beat of measure 2. Now where I began was I was on frets 15 and 14, the highest set of thirds we played in our exercise of playing the D scale in thirds. And I started with my bass note actually on string 6, that's beat 1. On the and of that beat, I played that 15th fret of the B string, and then on the second beat, I pinch the 4th and the 1st string. Okay, now I'm just going to move down my set of thirds. I have to switch fingerings there, so I have my ring on 14, my index on 12. I'm going to play on the and beat just that solo note on the B string again. Then I'm going to pinch 4 and 1. So now we start to see a little bit of a pattern that's developing, although it's tricky to recognize. So again, we have our bass note first, but then on the and we play a melody, then we pinch. On the and a melody, then we pinch. Okay, we're going to move down to the next fingering now. Same fingering, but to 12 and 10. We're going to play a melody note on the B string again, and then we're going to pinch again. Now notice there though, the pinch moved back to string 6, because if we try to relate to what the bass line is doing, again that first bass note's just all by itself, and that's the exception. Then we have a bass note on the D string, a bass note on the D string. That was beats 2 and 3. Now it resets because we're in the new measure. We're back on to string 6 on the bass. So I would try to make sure that you have this nice and locked in before you move on. See if you can play that 3 times in a row. Maybe nice and slow on that 3rd time. I call that the rule of 3. I make students do that a lot in lessons. I do it all the time in my own practice as well. You have to play it perfectly 3 times in a row, slowly on the 3rd time, and if you make a mistake on that last note of the 3rd time, you're back to 0 and you've got to start it all over again. So it's just a great way to force yourself to really make sure you have down what you're working on in the moment before you move on to the next thing, which is always such a temptation for all of us. So apply the rule of 3. I've heard other musicians even say you should do things 10 times in a row perfectly, so 3 might even be too little. But it's a good rule to start with, I think. And once you have that down, the next thing I would do is I would just back up 1 note from where we ended there. So I'm going to have us play the and of 3 in measure 1, which is that 12th fret of the B string. Okay, then what we're going to do is we're starting our second measure. We're going to pinch 6 and 1. Then we're going to back up into our next set of thirds. So now my middle and my index are on 10 and 9. I'm going to play on the and beat like I've been doing that solo melody note. I've got to drop my thumb to string 4 for my pinch. Okay, now I'm going to back up again, 2 frets, same fingering. I'm on 8 and 7. I'm going to play my solo melody note, I'm going to pinch strings 4 and 1 again, and then I'm going to back up to 7 and 5, changing fingerings to that wider fingering. I'm going to play the 7th fret. Now I'm pinching 6 and 1 again because I'm on the first beat of measure 3. Okay, so here is starting on that and of 3 in measure 1. And playing into the first beat of measure 3. Another great thing to try to do 3 times in a row. Now you can see a framework developing for how we're approaching these first 4 measures. We're going to once again start on the last note of the previous measure. So we're on the last note of measure 2, which is the and of beat 3. I'm in that same fingering we were on before, the 7th and the 5th fret of the B and the high E string, strings 2 and 1. And I'm going to play that last note of measure 2, that 7th fret of B, and that's going to lead me into measure 3. So I'm going to pinch 6 and 1. I'm going to move my fingering to the next set of thirds, which is the same fingering but down to the 5th and the 3rd fret. I'm going to play my melody note on the 2nd string, followed by a pinch of 4 and 1. I'm going to move to my next set of thirds. This is where we started our exercise before. I'm going to play again my melody note on the 2nd string. I'm going to pinch strings 4 and 1. Now I'm going to just take my middle finger, I'm going to move it back 1 fret to the 2nd fret of the B string. That's all I'm fretting there, everything else is open. I'm going to play that note on the and of 3, and then I'm going to pinch the open 6th and 1st string there. So what did I play there? It was... Okay, now we didn't cover this part in the exercise because we're actually just moving further back. We're just ascending lower into the next octave. We're playing it actually up here on frets 14 and 12. Same notes, just down an octave. So we're still in the thirds, we're just moving past the point of where we started the exercise before. So let's hear that measure one more time. Okay, that gave us measure 3 with just a little bit of the runway of that last note of measure 2. To play measure 4, let's start on that last note of measure 3, the 2nd fret of the 2nd string. We're going to play that note, followed by a pinch of 6 and 1, open. Then we're going to play the open 2nd string on the and beat. Now we're going to fret the 3rd fret of the 2nd string and the 2nd fret of the 3rd string. We're going to pinch strings 4 and 2, the D and the B, followed by the 3rd string. We're fretting that 2nd fret of G there. Okay, now take your middle finger, fret the 2nd fret of the 2nd string, do the same exact picking you just did. You're going to pinch 4 and 2, followed by string 3. Okay, and now to get into the first note of measure 5, play the 5th fret of string 6. We're going to pinch string 6, 3 and 2, so really the first chord there as we play into measure 5. Okay, so here's how that should sound. Like that. Okay, now we've gone through each of those 4 measures, and as I suggested, I would try to treat each of those 4 measures as their own separate thing for a little while and try to get really comfortable doing each of those 4 segments we just worked on individually. The next thing I would try to do is I would try to combine measure 1 and 2. Then I would try to combine measures 3 and 4. Then I would try to combine all 4 measures together and see if you can put it all together. Now, once you start to do that, hopefully all that preparation has helped to make it a little bit easier. Still, sometimes I find it to be a tricky passage to play. It's one of these ones where you definitely don't want to think about it. You want to just put in all that really upfront rigid practice of each little detail so that you don't have to think about it as you can play it. You can just listen to it. But still, sometimes the mind gets in the way. So personally, what I find to be really helpful when I play this part is I try to let the melody just kind of do its thing, and I actually try to focus my listening on this. If I can get my ear just really listening to the bass line and having that be the focus of my attention, usually, let's see, there's something about that helps me lock it in. And I think what it is I'm focusing on a simple, steady, repetitive part of what's happening in all of those different details I'm trying to manage, and I'm just allowing the other part to kind of work on its own. I'm just simplifying what I'm listening to. That way I don't overthink it. I'm not focused on the busier part, right, which is all those melody notes that are flowing by under the bass line. We often bring our experiences as listeners into our experiences trying to learn an instrument, but they may not help us as much as we think because we're used to hearing songs from start to finish, just sitting back and enjoying the ride. And if we try to do that as players, we often really labor over a piece much longer than we need to. We run into frustration because maybe sometimes we play it all right, other times we really struggle. We can't figure out why we don't have command over it. And I think it can be really challenging to get people to adopt that different sort of mindset where, no, at first what you need to do is you need to break things into little pieces. You need to develop a real command over those little pieces and then start to put the little pieces together. But if you do that upfront hard work, you're going to get to the reward of the pleasure of playing something well in the flow with the command so much faster. So the deception is that in the moment, it feels really hard to practice that way, but we'll get to the reward so much faster if we do. Whereas on the flip side, it may feel easier and more enjoyable in the moment of practice to just kind of go easy on ourselves and just look at the music and try to play it from the beginning to the end. But then months down the line, we're still struggling to get the song down. And I think that's hard for all of us to learn in our musical journey. It definitely was for me. But for myself and for my students, I noticed that once they have the experience of realizing that, oh, if I do this more grueling labor up front, I'm actually going to get to the goal so much faster. And I'm going to get to that point where I'm just making music and feeling good about it and feeling in the flow. So I suggest that you explore that in your own playing of this one. I think this is a really good one for that because, again, it's kind of a big tongue twister there, what we just covered in those first four measures. So now we're in measure 5, and when we're in drop D tuning and we fret that 5th fret of string 6, we're often going to be on a G chord because that note is a G. We're used to a G being here on the 3rd fret, but since we've detuned that string, that means the G note is now on fret 5 because we're not starting on an E on that string anymore. We're starting on a D, so we'd have D, E, F, G is now on the 5th fret. And that's the chord that we're going to be in. It's actually going to kind of turn into a G7 by the end of the next 4 measures, which is why you see it labeled G7 in the tab. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pinch 6, 3, and 2, and then I'm going to play 3 and 2 on the and beat of that first beat. So 1 and 2, 3. It's kind of a breath of fresh air after those first 4 measures. So that's measure 5. As measure 6 begins, we're just playing string 6 in the bass, and then string 4 on that second beat of the bass. So just a couple bass notes to start that off, then it gets a little trickier. So we might hear it as going back to the beginning of measure 5. And that gets us to the second beat of measure 6. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to bring our middle finger over to the 2nd fret of the G string. We're going to play our last bass note, beat 3 of that measure, with the thumb picking the 4th string, and we're going to pinch that note with the 2nd fret of the G string. And as we do, we're going to slide up to the 4th fret, your index finger's free, it's going to drop down onto the 3rd fret of the 2nd string. So that would give us going to the beginning of measure 6. And that's a triplet there, so we could think of the count there as 1, 2, 3, and All right, now as we're coming into measure 7, a number of different ways you could finger this part. What I tend to do is I use my thumb to play that bass note on fret 5 of string 6. I use my ring finger to play the 5th fret of the 1st string. I'm going to pinch those 2 notes together, so that was pinching string 6 and 1. Dropping my thumb for the next 2 bass notes. You don't have to use your thumb there on that bass note. You could use your middle finger if the thumb feels uncomfortable, so that's a consideration you could have. The only tricky thing, I guess the reason I use my thumb there is because my middle finger is already doing something right before that. It's playing that slide and sustaining that 4th fret note, so my thumb's just kind of hanging out and I can use 2 fingers that are not already doing something else to get to those next notes. So in general, if we can use free fingers to play the next thing, that's better because we don't have to kind of make a big jump all of a sudden with that middle finger jumping up from fret 4. But it's possible. It's not something that's going to really hold you back. So again, if that thumb feels just a little bit too difficult for you at this point, maybe just try using your middle finger and you just got to kind of get it there nice and fast from that 4th fret note. I noticed that time too, I didn't put this in the tab, but this is something I do a lot without even thinking about it. I added some middle voices. I added the G and the B string, and I did a big 4-fingered pinch that time, which I think I often do when I'm playing that part. Okay, the last note of that measure is the open B string. So we'd get that on the and beat, and then as we come into measure 8, bring your pinky to the 6th fret of the 2nd string. You're going to pinch strings 6 and 2, and then you're going to play your final 2 bass notes. Okay, so this portion, it has some tricky parts in it, but I think it's a little bit easier to digest than those first 4 measures. So let's hear now measures 5 through 8. Alright, here it is for the first time. The reward for all the practice we put into those first 4 measures, we're just going to play them. Exactly the same up until we get to the 13th measure. And the only thing that changes is instead of landing on that G chord like we did before, we're going to land on a B7. And for this B7 chord, because of what we're going to be playing in our picking hand, you don't have to play that pinky note that you might normally play on a B7 on the 2nd fret of the high E string. That finger can just hang out. Just concentrate on getting the other 3 fingers there, because when you get to that B7 on beat 1 of measure 13, you're going to pinch strings 5, 3, and 2. Then you're going to drop, or actually before you drop your thumb for the bass note, just like we did on the G chord, the index and middle finger, they're going to play an extra bit of the melody there on the and of 1. So 1 and 2, 3. We just bring the thumb down to string 4 after that to play beats 2 and 3 in the bass. So 1 and 2, 3. We come into the next measure, 1, 2, just the bass. So the B7 chord is mimicking what the G chord did a little bit earlier. Just as the B7 measures have so far mimicked the rhythm of the G measures, that's going to continue as we mimic that triplet that happened a little bit earlier. So after we've played 1 and 2, 3, 1, 2, we're going to make a jump up the neck here, the index finger to the 7th fret of D, the middle finger to the 8th fret of the G string, and here's our triplet on beat 3 of measure 14. The thumb's going to play string 4, then the middle and the index are going to pick strings 2 and 3, so that was 4, 3, 2. Okay, now take the pinky and drop it onto the 10th fret of the 2nd string, pinch all 3 of those notes together, and then just keep your thumb pedaling that bass note on the D string, so that would give us 1, 2, 3 for measure 15. Okay, let's hear those measures. That basically is going to make up our B7 theme, just those 3 measures. In measure 16, we're going to take a C7 shape, so a C chord with the pinky added to the 3rd fret of the G string. We're going to move that up the neck until it becomes an F7 chord. So we're going to move it from C7 to D7 to E7. And once we get to frets 6, 7, and 8, now we're on an F7. I'm going to take my thumb, index, and middle finger, and I'm going to pinch strings 5, 3, and 2. Then I'm going to drop my thumb to play that note on the 7th fret of the D string as my 2nd beat of bass in that measure. And then I'm going to be on an E9 chord next, which is going to be fret 7, 6, 7, 7 of the A, D, G, and B string. And I'm going to do that same 3-fingered pinch I did a moment ago on strings 5, 3, and 2. And that gives me measure 16 there. So that would be 1, 2, 3. Now, I'm pretty sure this is a place where I departed a little bit from the lead sheet. I don't think it tells you to play that F7 chord. I just liked the dissonant sound of adding that in, kind of walking us into that E7 chord. And whenever I play that measure, I always think of it like the brass section, the horns giving some blasts of notes. So coming from the measure before that, I kind of let these notes ring, I think, typically. And then I kind of cut those notes short. Again, kind of imagining that the guitar is the brass section there. As we get to the 2nd page and measure 17, we're still in that E9 chord form, although we can take our pinky off, which is briefly going to turn it back into an E7 chord, and we're going to play this in measure 17. So I played my bass note all by itself on string 5 to start off, and then I played the open B before pinching strings 4 and 3. Followed by the open B again, 4 and 3 again, open B again, so that gives me. I'm almost going to do the same thing as I get to measure 18. The only difference is this time, rather than playing the bass note by itself on the 1st beat, I'm actually going to pinch 5 and 3, followed by my open B, drop the thumb, so now I'm doing the same thing that we did on beats 2 and 3 of the last measure. I'm pinching 4 and 3, followed by the open B. Now I'm going to add my pinky back onto the 7th fret of the B string, which brings me back into that E9. I'm going to pinch strings 5, 3, and 2, followed by the index and middle, hitting that pair of notes on the 3rd and 2nd string in extra time. Drop my thumb for the next 2 bass notes, and the last measure of that line is just the bass. On that part, whenever I get there, I think I tend to add some vibrato with my fretting hand, and kind of maybe is a little evocative of the keyboard sound in the Fats Waller version. I think he's maybe playing on the organ, if I'm remembering correctly there. So that's another cool effect you can add, is a little bit of vibrato there once you get back into that E7 chord, give it that kind of wavy tremolo sound. As we get to the 2nd line of page 2, measure 21, we're going to be on a G chord again, but this time it's going to be G minor. We're going to keep the bass note the same. We're going to play that G on fret 5 of string 6, but then our index finger is going to come down and bar the 3rd fret. We only need to concentrate on getting the 3rd fret of the G and the B string, though. You'll probably be also barring the 1st string just to get those 2 notes down, but we're not going to play that note. So we really just need to concentrate on those 3 notes, strings 6, 3, and 2. The thumb is eventually going to come down and fill in the rest of that chord by playing a bass note on the open D string. Now these measures of G minor, they're going to mimic what we just did a moment ago when we were in measures 17 and 18, where we were playing that E7, E9 theme. So what strings we play here will change, but the combination of fingers and the rhythm is going to stay the same. So in measure 21, we're going to start with just a solo bass note, just as we did in measure 17. Then we're going to play the 3rd string on the and. Okay, now we're going to pinch strings 4 and 2. followed by the third string on the and. Okay, do that again on beat 3. And that's going to give us this for measure 21. Okay, and as we go into measure 22, it's almost the same thing, but just like we saw in the relationship between measure 17 and 18, instead of playing a solo bass note, this time we're going to pinch on beat 1. We're going to pinch strings 6 and 2. We're going to play that third string note, and just like we did on the last measure, we're going to pinch strings 4 and 2, followed by that G string note, and we're going to do that twice in a row. So here's measures 21 and 22. Okay, so again, strings are changing, but rhythms and picking patterns are remaining the same. So it's good to connect 17 and 18 to 21 and 22 in that respect. As we get to measure 23, we're still going to be on the same chord, but we have to do a weird little flip with our fingers to get our melody note in a comfortable place. What we're going to do is we're going to bring our index finger to replace our ring finger on fret 5 of string 6. That's going to allow the pinky to fret the 7th fret of the B string, and we're going to pinch those two notes together, strings 6 and 2. We're going to play the melody note on string 2 on the and beat, so we'll pick that an extra time. Drop the thumb for our next two bass notes, and the last measure of that line is just bass. Let's hear that second line of page 2, measures 21 through 24, all together now. Okay, now we're at an important moment in the song because we're at ending 1. So we're going to play ending 1, and then everything up to the point we're at right now is going to repeat again, and then we're going to skip ending 1 and play ending 2. So now you've learned a huge portion of the song. All you have left to learn are these endings because everything we've learned up to here is going to repeat. Ending 1 is nice in the sense that it starts with what we already played in measures 17 and 18. So measures 25 and 26, these are just a repetition of something we've already done. So we're in that E7 chord there, although this time we don't return to the E9. Instead, we're going to come over to an A chord. Now we come to fret 2 of string 2, and we're going to pinch that with string 5 in the bass, so strings 5 and 2. We're going to do that again as we walk the note up to the 3rd fret, and then to the 4th fret, and then to the 5th fret. Then just play a bass note on the A string by itself. Come back to the 2nd fret on the and of that beat. Come to the 4th fret of the G string and pinch that with that A string in the bass. So we're just staying on the A string in the bass and pedaling that. And then on the and of that beat, we're going to play the 3rd fret of the 3rd string. So that's going to give us 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, and 3, and that 3rd fret of the 3rd string note left us hanging on a little bit of dissonance there because it's sending us to the resolution on the 2nd fret of the 3rd string. And as we get there, let's bar the 2nd fret of the 4th string as well. Bring our ring finger to the 4th fret of string 6. This gives us an F sharp minor chord. We're going to pinch strings 6 and 3, drop the thumb to string 4 for our next two bass notes. 1, 2, 3. Now we'll go to the B7 chord from earlier, which, just like before, we don't need to have the pinky on the 2nd fret of the high E string, so we can just play the middle index and ring finger notes of that B7. We're going to pinch strings 5, 3, and 2. Drop our thumb to string 4 for the next two bass notes. So just like the previous measure, 1, 2, 3. Then the middle and the ring finger, they're going to stay on the 2nd fret, but they have to change strings. Not far to go though. Middle finger just drops down one string to the 2nd fret of the 4th string. The ring finger goes to the 2nd fret of the high E string. And with our picking hand, we're going to play strings 4, 3, 2, and 1. We're just going to roll those notes. Just let your fingers fire off one at a time to get that nice rolling effect. Take your ring finger off of the 1st string to open it up. That makes it an E minor chord. We're just going to stay on that 4th string So we're pedaling that fourth string for all three bass notes of this measure. 1 and 2, 3. Okay, now that ring finger can fret the second fret of the second string, because in the next measure we're ultimately getting to an A7 chord, but you're also going to need to add your pinky to the third fret of the second string before that, because the first thing we're going to do here, similar to what we did in the last measure, we're going to roll. This time it's only 4, 3, and 2, like that. Take your pinky off to play that second fret of the second string on the and, so 1 and 2, 3. And the thumb is still pedaling that same bass note, the second fret of the fourth string. So that gives us this for those final two measures. Kind of a cool effect there. In the 31st measure, the thumb is playing the root note of E minor. But on A7, this E note is the fifth. A, B, C, D, E. It's 5 notes from the root. So kind of a cool effect there in the bass, hearing the root transition to being the fifth on the next chord. Here's the first ending in its entirety. And now we're going to go back to the very beginning of the tune, and we're going to play all the way until we get to the first ending, but we're going to skip the first ending, and that's going to leave us into the second ending. So we see ending 2 on page 3. We're at measure 33, and measure 33 and 34 are going to repeat some familiar measures now. These are the same two measures that we played to start off the first ending, and we had also played them a little earlier as measures 17 and 18. Okay, this time though, it's going to lead us to an A13 chord, and to play that, we're going to play the 5th fret of the D string with our index, the 6th fret of the G with our middle, and the 7th fret of the B with our ring, and we're going to play all 4 of those notes, the 4th note being the thumb playing the A string in the bass. And we're going to play it like that. We're going to play 1 and 2, 3. The thumb drops down to the 4th string for our bass note. 1 and 2, 3. The next measure, we're just going to play the bass note, open A string, followed by the 5th fret of the D string, and then we're going to bring our ring finger to the 7th fret of the D string. So let's hear measures 35 and 6 together. Okay, take that ring finger as you come into measure 37, just drop it down to the G string. You're going to pinch that note with string 4 in the bass, open 4th string. Your next bass note is the open A string, so that was 1, 2. On the 3rd beat, bring that ring finger over to the 5th fret of the 2nd string. You're going to pinch that note with string 6 in the bass, and you're going to immediately slide up to the 7th fret. So you see that tiny little 5 there. That's a grace note. It means it has no time value. It's just the starting point of that slide to get us to fret 7. Now once we've done that slide, play the 5th fret of the 1st string. There's one of our little thirds again from the beginning of the song. That would give us this for measure 37. Okay, now take that index finger, move it back to the 3rd fret of the 1st string as your ring finger comes up to play the bass note, G note there on the 5th fret of the 6th string. We're going to pinch 6 and 1, drop your thumb to string 4. Okay, now the index finger is going to travel up to the 7th fret of the high E string. We're going to pinch that with the final bass note of that measure, open 4th string, so we're pinching 4 and 1. Then the pinky's going to play the 10th fret of the 1st string. So measure 38 would be, we think of that as 1, 2, 3, and. Okay, now leave your pinky on the 10th fret. Just take that index finger. It's staying on the 7th fret, but it's going to bar the 7th fret. on the G and the B string, and this gives us a nice D chord to end on. We're going to play string 6, 3, 2, and 1. It's another place that might sound nice with a little roll of the picking fingers as we do that. Take your thumb to string 4 for your bass notes. 1, 2, 3. And then we've got one big chord here at the end of the measure, and because we're in drop D, we've got D, A, D as strings 6, 5, and 4. We can play all 6 strings here and just get a big pretty D chord. I like to bring my thumb a little bit close to the bridge where the strings are nice and tight and we can get this very bright percussive sound, and I let my nail just kind of dig in there a little bit, and it really brings out some pretty resonance at the end there. So ending 2, would sound like that. Well, if you made it this far, I hope you've enjoyed learning the Jitterbug Waltz. Has some challenging passages in there, but it's another one of these songs that after you've put some time in, it can be really rewarding. Even in those challenging stages, I think it's a satisfying one to try to work out some of those wrinkles and tongue twisters that we encounter in some of the different passages. It's a pretty cool jazzy waltz. It's one of these ones that I've played for many years now and still enjoy and come back to quite often, and I hope that will be true for you too. So let me know if you have any questions, have fun, and I'll see you soon with another song.